Do you think Fed Chair Powell watches the price of gold? And if he does, what is the price of gold whispering or screaming at him right now?
Well, he's never mentioned that he watched it. This was my most recent podcast that you're referring to. And so people, if you don't know about my podcast, check me out at schiffradio.com is the podcast. My YouTube channel, Schiff Report, we put them up there as well. But I was watching Greenspan interviewed on CNBC. And specifically, he told CNBC that his greatest concern was inflation. That's what he was worried about. But it's ironic because that's also Powell's concern, but for the opposite reason. Powell says we don't have enough inflation, we want more. And Greenspan is like, I'm worried we already have too much. And so if Greenspan is right, and why should Greenspan be any less credible? I mean, he used to be the Fed chairman, so why isn't his view just as likely to be correct as the current chairman, Powell? But if Greenspan is right, then Powell is just throwing gasoline on the fire that Greenspan is already concerned about. But the part about gold is I remember when Greenspan was Fed chairman and gold was trading at about $350 an ounce. Right now we're just under 2,000, right, 1950. But he used to talk about $300 and $400 gold. And what he used to say publicly was that if gold price went down to 300, he knew that he was too tight. And if gold got up towards 400, he knew he was too loose. And so he would use the price of gold as a signal, a market signal, as to whether or not he had the right monetary policy. So if you saw the price of gold going up too much, hey, I'm creating too much inflation, I better raise rates, tighten policy. And if gold went down, oh, we're too tight, right? So he was looking at gold. But ever since Greenspan left, nobody gives a damn about the price of gold. And so I don't think Powell even cares or even appreciates the significance of $2,000 gold. And I don't think he's worried about $3,000 gold or $4,000 gold. He should be. I think if he knew as much about as Greenspan does, I think Greenspan has a much better understanding of economics and money than any of the Fed chairmen that have succeeded him. So I think his outlook has actually a lot more credibility than either Bernanke, Yellen, or Powell.
Peter, is the money printing the root cause of all the economic and social problems we see today, like the increasing wealth gap, the ever-rising real inflation, and big government, etc.?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say that it's the Fed and inflation that is to blame for everything. But it's certainly a very large contributing factor. But obviously, it takes, two to tango. And so the Fed has had a lot of help from the government in general, Congress and the president. They have passed a lot of laws. Now, you can argue that a lot of this spending might not have taken place, but for the willingness of the Fed to finance it, to monetize it, to artificially restrain interest rates. So the Fed has done its part, but of course, Congress didn't have to act so recklessly and irresponsibly. Just because the Fed was pouring alcohol, they didn't have to drink it. So the government has done a lot, and of course, the public, the public voted for these guys, so we can't let the American public off the hook for their share of the blame, right? So there's plenty of blame to go around, but I do think that the principal blame would go on the Fed. I think that because the Fed could have done its job and really reined in a lot of the other branches. In fact, I actually blame the judicial system too, because a lot of what the Congress has done, a lot of the government spending and programs and regulations are actually unconstitutional. And a lot of this stuff should have been struck down by the courts. But these guys are asleep at the switch. They don't really understand the Constitution. They don't apply it to the government the way the founding fathers intended. So, so many different, aspects of our government have let us down. The judiciary, the legislature, the executive, all three branches, and then, of course, the Federal Reserve, which isn't even a branch. It's really independent. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a real disaster. And probably if we could get rid of one a year, it'd be 1913, because that's not only when we got the Federal Reserve, but we also got the income tax. And so working hand in glove, both the inflation tax and the income tax have really undermined America's standard of living, economic growth, stature in the world. So it's really unfortunate that we went down that path. Of course, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I don't believe that there was any, it was a devious plot, but unfortunately, every time you give the government some power, they abuse it. And so they've had 100 years now to abuse this power, more than 100 years. And it's not just that, they got the camel's nose in the tent. Now it's not just the camel. We got a whole herd of camels in this tent, and it, stinks pretty bad.
Okay. There's often the phrase that the Fed put the punch bowl in front of Wall Street and they can't take the punch bowl away. Now we sort of see the punch bowl in front of Main Street. Will that punch bowl, will it ever be able to be taken away from Main Street?
Well, I've been describing it now not as a punch bowl, but as a swimming pool. I mean, that's how much punch is there. And I don't even know if there's any punch in there. At this point, it's pure alcohol that we're swimming in, and yeah, it's everywhere. But no, they can't, unless they want to do the responsible thing and admit, of course, that everything they've done in the past was reckless and irresponsible and wrong. See, the Fed can't do the right thing without admitting that everything else it's done in the past has been wrong. But it's very reluctant to do that, if it even understands that at all. I mean, that's the problem. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. All the Fed ever does is create inflation. They print money, they lower interest rates, and what does that get us? It gets us a bubble that pops, and now they have to blow up a bigger bubble that pops, and they have to try to blow up a bigger one. But in the meantime, they are undermining the actual health of the U.S. economy, right? They're making the problems they're trying to solve worse with the very policies that they continue to implement, because they refuse to admit, or they don't even understand, that they're lighting the fires that they're trying to put out with the same material that set the fires, right? It's gasoline, right? And so I don't know if they're ever going to realize this until they just get burned, which is what's going to happen. But unfortunately, it's the country. It's not just these wildfires out west, but I mean, the whole country is going to be torched by this monetary policy when the dollar crashes.
Peter, do you think gold will return as the primary monetary reserve? And I'm asking this because fiat currencies, they give governments the unconstrained ability to print as much money as they want, spend as much money as they want. Why would politicians and governments want to give that up?
Well, it's not about wanting to give it up. It's going to be about having to give it up, right? I mean, that's, when their backs are to the wall and they don't have a choice, that's what's going to happen. I mean, once the public loses confidence in a fiat monetary system, how do you reinstill that confidence? I mean, gold is the answer. And what I think is going to happen before the United States goes on a gold standard, because obviously I think we have the least amount of incentive to do that, right? Because, the dollar is being used instead of gold. So, but what I think is going to happen is all the other nations of the world that have been using the dollar instead of gold will just start using gold again instead of the dollar. Go back to the way it was before the dollar replaced gold as the primary reserve. And again, you have to remember, the reason that we were able to convince the world to switch from gold to dollars is because the dollar itself was not only backed by gold, but redeemable on demand in gold. So the dollar was as good as gold. In fact, it was better because you could take your dollars and then loan them to the U.S. government by buying treasuries. And now you got interest, right, which you didn't get on your gold. So they had the best of both worlds. They had gold and they had interest. And so this is what happened. But of course, we abused that privilege and we started printing too much money. And then we defaulted on our commitment to pay real money for our IOUs, to pay gold for Federal Reserve notes. The dollar was marked down, but it wasn't, knocked out. I mean, the world continued to accept dollars and hold them as the reserve, just at a lower exchange rate than the one that prevailed previously. There was a big drop in the dollar during the 70s against the Deutschmark, the Swiss franc, the yen. Gold, of course, was revalued, or as the dollar went down, gold went from $35 an ounce to $850. Oil prices went from $3 a barrel to $30 a barrel because we devalued the dollar by severing its link from gold. And so now we had a dollar backed by nothing.